Well, good morning, small group leaders. Our scriptures this week come from Philippians 2, 5 through 11, and Revelation 5, the entire chapter, that's verses 1 through 14. So we have 5 questions this week. The first question is this: when was a time that you thought you were getting one thing, but it turned out to be another? When was a time you thought you were getting one thing, but it turned out to be another? Examples could be that you expected a nice present, but got an appliance for the house. Or maybe the anatomy scan told you the wrong gender of your baby and you were shocked. Or maybe you thought that you weren't going to get a bonus, but your boss surprised everyone. So when was a time you thought you were getting one thing, but it turned out to be another? Question number 2. In Revelation 5, John was expecting to see the Lion of Judah, but the next sight he saw was of a lamb that was slain. So how do you think John felt in that moment? And remember, as you do this question, this was the John who was one of Jesus' closest friends, who reclined at the table with him. So he saw a slain lamb that was victorious, but he also saw his friend and rabbi. So the third question is, the Christians in John's time were experiencing suffering and persecution, and they were waiting and longing for God to bring judgment and justice, for God to make things right. Yet one of the elders tells John, "Do not weep. The Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed." So the question then is, how has Jesus already won, and who or what did he triumph over? And the second part of the question would be, how would that give John and his readers hope? So if Jesus, the Lion of Judah, has already triumphed, then how has he won, and what did he triumph over? And how would that give John and his readers hope? The fourth question is, in today's sermon, Daniel argues that God's version of power, position, and priorities are often so very different from our own and that of our society and our world. So this question has 2 parts. How does our world view power, position, and priorities? How does our world view power, position, and priorities? And then the second is, what is God's version of all 3 of those things? So what's God's version of power, God's version of position, God's version of priorities? And then question number 5. Philippians 2:5 tells us we should have the same attitude, this way of thinking, feeling, being, and acting that Christ Jesus had. He humbled himself. He gave up his power and his position to fulfill the priorities of God. So what is one way that you can adopt the attitude of Christ this week? Okay, so I'm going to run through our questions one more time. When was a time you thought you were getting one thing, but it turned out to be another? John was expecting to see the Lion of Judah, but instead he saw a lamb that was slain. So how did John feel in that moment? The third is that the Christians in John's time were experiencing suffering and persecution, and they were waiting for God's judgment and justice. Yet one of the elders says the Lion of Judah has already triumphed. So how has Jesus already won, and who or what did he triumph over? And how would that give John and his readers hope? The fourth question is that how does our world view these 3 ideas, power, position, and priorities? And what are God's version of power, position, and priorities? And then Philippians 5 calls us to have the same attitude as Christ. So what's one way that you can adopt the attitude of Christ this week? Make sure you spend time praying together and encouraging each other. Again, thank you for all the work that you do with your small group, and I look forward to hearing how God is blessing your conversations this week. God bless you.